Hi everyone, I'm here right now in the Cannon House office building on the House side of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. And something interesting hit the pages of the New York Times just in the last couple of days. First of all, the paper interviewed former President Joe Biden. And what came out of that interview, which was supplemented with a fairly thorough investigation into what's called the Autopen. That's where presidents use a, automatic pen that signs their name. One thing that came out of this, Republicans have been trying to make this a big scandal for a long time. And I think the qualifier there, big scandal, is an important word because it's one thing for something to be wrong. It's another thing for something to be so wrong that it becomes a political problem and it becomes a substantive problem. Well, what the New York Times has reported just became a substantive problem for Democrats, but particularly for Biden world. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, remember to subscribe over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. But right now, House Republicans are already raring to investigate Biden's use of the Autopen. Why? Well, because the Autopen was used for some genuinely unprecedented, during a genuinely unprecedented pardoning spree. So now Republicans want answers to questions about when the Autopen was used, and combined with the news of Joe Biden's failing health, which many experts have weighed in to say must have been known to his doctor while he was president. We don't have concrete evidence of that yet, other than doctors saying it seems unusual this would just suddenly pop up. And what we already knew about Biden's failing ability to communicate, Biden's failing memory, and all of that has made Republicans very eager to find out whether there were undue pressures, whether staffers were using the Autopen necessarily without having permission. Now, Biden says he approved every single clemency decision. But of course, from an ailing elderly gentleman with known memory problems, Republicans now feel that, in particular, someone like Anthony Fauci, who was pardoned, preemptively pardoned by Joe Biden, should be under a microscope again. Senator Rand Paul, Republican Senator Rand Paul, is already saying it needs to be this investigation into perjury because of what Anthony Fauci claimed when he was playing fast and loose with the definition of quote-unquote gain of function. In the earlier days of the pandemic, Senator Paul is already saying, well, looks like we're going to go back to this now. And I think until you had Joe Biden in the New York Times confirming, as he did, this was buried down multiple paragraphs into the story, I think it may have been even 10 paragraphs deep into the story, that there were broad categories he approved. That didn't mean he approved every single name. In some cases, according to the Times, staffers were making revisions and then using the Autopen to sign without getting them approved, without getting revisions approved. That's going to be the subject of investigations here in Congress, so long as Republicans are in the majority and have the ability to make these discussions happen in hearings and to use their investigatory powers, subpoena powers, to continue getting to the bottom of this. You may remember just last week, the House Oversight Committee tried to have this conversation with Joe Biden's doctor, who said he was pleading the fifth and not speaking because, in part, of physician-patient confidentiality. Well, what was interesting about that is, again, physician-patient confidentiality doesn't necessarily apply to the questions House Republicans were asking, which is, were you ever told to lie about the state of Joe Biden's health? There's really no plausible reason that you would be protecting doctor-patient confidentiality by not definitively saying no, if the answer to that question were no. So Republicans now feel that with this disclosure in the New York Times, where even Joe Biden said he was in part just approving categories as opposed to every single name, and of course it's a little bit amusing that the Times buried that so deep in their story. Conservative media immediately picked up on it and said, this is your headline. You got a scoop, and you chose not to focus on it. You chose to focus on this broader story about Biden responding to Republicans trying to make a scandal, instead of actually the substantive admission that there may indeed be a there, that the president himself did not oversee every single signing with the Autopen. And I just hear myself talking about this and feel ridiculous that right now now in July of 2025 with all of the problems in the world. There was just a 12-day war in Iran and a very fragile state of affairs in the Middle East in general. There's an escalating war in Ukraine that should have ended long ago, and that the president is struggling to get any deal on the table that's plausible that could potentially end this war. As the One Big Beautiful Bill passed here not long ago, and people are, inflation, for example, today, we just got new CPI numbers, inflation numbers, as I'm speaking today, and inflation did go up. Republicans are cheering that it didn't go up as high as expected, and that it's not looking like some of the most dire predictions about the tariffs. It's possible that's still to come, but we have significant structural changes happening in the economy. The New York Times also had a funny story pushing back on the taco line about Donald Trump. Trump always chickens out by saying tariffs are up pretty significantly from where they were from the baseline of the Biden administration, and that's true. And so it feels ridiculous to be going back to the well of Biden Autopen, and it's cringy for me to hear Republicans sometimes beat this drum over and over again. It feels like red meat, and it feels often like just a political weapon that distracts from other questions. At the same time, there is significant evidence Anthony Fauci perjured himself. It is terrifying that the President of the United States was out of his mental capacity. We now know this definitively as you can, as somebody who's not in the Biden inner circle. You can pretty clearly say he was incapacitated and not fit for office, that it was covered up so neatly by reporters, but particularly by Biden's inner circle, by people who are still in positions of power and are asking for the trust of the American people. That's frightening. It remains a scandal. It remains something that weighs on Democratic Party voters. There's a story in Axios not long ago about how that weighed on people's minds when they're being asked to choose between establishment icon, basically Andrew Cuomo, the last name Cuomo, and Zoran Melody. This does matter to people. I think Democrats underestimate the extent to which it was a generational breach of trust in the party that they now have to go above and beyond and then over backwards, essentially, to regain trust of their voters. At least the establishment does. So as ridiculous as it feels, and as, I think that's the low of a priority it is relative to those kitchen table issues, it's significant, and now it's really, really not going away for Democrats. A case where the more Joe Biden chose to talk about it, if he hadn't said anything, indeed, to the New York Times, maybe this wouldn't be so significant, but now it really is. So thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back here with more sound.